Peter.
Kia ora tātou. Te mihi tū kia koutou katoa. Ko koutou mai nei tēnei rā, e mihi. Whātaro whātu le pa ia, mana ngā malu. That little double bang of mihi, just a nod to my very conscious biases, courtesy of my funny name also, a Juna Samoa Dad and a Ngāti Wai Ngāti Hine Mum. So that's, I guess, always going to colour what you hear from me. Low-income populations and retirement issues is what I've been asked to talk about. What I did feel compelled to talk into though is the, so I'm here talking today as the GM Community Commission. As you heard earlier today, for my sins, I've found myself the acting commissioner since December. A little bit of context for the review is that, as I said before, it's due to be delivered in December. There will be a new commissioner on board in July. MB is currently working through the recruitment process for a new retirement commissioner. They'll be required to, I guess, complete and hand on the report, just as the current commissioner inherited, I think, the back end of the process previously. So there might be a phasing issue there for MB to think about. But those of you who are particularly interested in this, sorry, Kate, I didn't warn you about this. Getting engaged in this process, the engine room for the 2019 review will be Kate Riddell, up the back there, who's waiting at the moment, our program director for the 19 review, and she is putting together that piece of work this year. Much of what's going on right now is the work around research reviews, commissioning pieces of work as we work towards the arrival of a new commissioner, and then the engagement piece through the back half of this year. That's the context for that. Back to what I was asked to bring to you today, and I'm going to figure out if I can drive this thing. Success, there you go. This is for nothing other than some context for my role at the Commission since 2015, and I guess why I'm talking into this space. When I arrived in 2015, it was part of the Commissioner's shift towards focusing on the plight of financially vulnerable New Zealanders and communities and what's going on in that space. Much of my work since has been around cross-government partnerships, particularly in the Maori and Pasifika space. And as the slide shows you, is the versus housing and fire and water. I had occasion to meet Len at last year at a workshop, a forum convened by the Children's Commissioner, DPMC's Child Poverty Unit, Child Wellbeing Unit, also driving that. And I guess I hinted how joined up some of this work has started to be, but I guess by the back end of this, part of what I'm saying is it needs to be much more joined up as well. Just those are examples of the partnerships. In a lot of cases, we're not talking about financial capability being the answer, but it has a role to play in improving outcomes in a whole lot of other spaces. The work we did with Tamaki Regeneration, starting back in 14-15, has grown to national partnerships with Te Puri Kōkiri, some NGO level work with Pacific providers. We're working with Pacific Farm and Water nationally now, helping them to build capability across their Navigator network, who in the last 3 years have directly supported 10,000 Pacific whānau. And even problem gambling, something in a discussion I've had more recently with our friends at ThinCap, the MSD funded network of 200 providers nationally who were previously under the old budgeting services umbrella. But there's some of these pieces of work that, things like problem gambling that are more connected directly to that financial hardship piece. But that's where we are, that's where I've been. My involvement in the 2016 review was primarily around the section that was themed vulnerable groups. And Scott McMurray, who we've already heard from, was part of that process as well, and I can remember dragging him to Kaikoui for part of that month for a number of focus groups that we convened up there. But it was some of that work, I guess, that informed where we're at. The little rider at the bottom there, I am neither a research nor policy specialist. I saw the program and I thought it was a stitch-up on between a couple of seasoned campaigners. Don't expect loads of data because that would be like me bringing in after a gunfight. I'm not going to do that for you. So it's, but I'm also have a chance of helping you catch up. Low-income populations. And I guess part of this is what does that even mean? I mean, there's a whole lot of people looking to put numbers on what low income, what financial hardship is, and there's some important work going on in that space. I'm not going to do that today, because I guess there's elements of what an adequate income is that can be quite subjective. So suffice to say, we are I guess in working in this area with New Zealanders who are in this financially vulnerable space, and my work around Maori and Pasifika, a lot of our partnerships, we rely on the networks and the channels they engage with in order to ensure the switch arriving at the right levels. And in terms of low-income populations, I did figure I probably don't need to talk to you about what's tough about not having enough. Explaining how tough it is to be poor isn't really what I was going to do here today. What I did want to focus on was the insights that inform our work in this area and the things that we'll consider as we roll into this year's review. I will go back to the 2016 review. Part of what the Commissioner did in 2016, we were tasked with considering the issues for vulnerable groups, as they were taken at that time. And the five vulnerable groups that we were asked to consider were Māori, were Pasifika, were women, disabilities, and renters at retirement. One of the things that the Commissioner chose to do was take a step back from that, rather than labelling entire groups as vulnerable, was focused instead on identifying the vulnerability factors. Now, even though that we know that women are arriving at retirement, I think on average 18% worse off than men financially, labelling half the population as vulnerable straight out of the gate was not really where we wanted to be. The key factors identified as part of that process as contributing to financial vulnerability at retirement were, not surprisingly, health expectancy, skills and employment, the risk profile for manual workers relative to white-collar workers as their bodies are breaking down in their 40s and 50s, low savings, and housing. No surprises in any of that. Social isolation and caring for others were also identified as contributing factors. That social isolation piece may be an argument for a minister for loneliness here, but it's, I guess there are a whole lot of factors at play in this. The other key insight from that work is that financial vulnerability doesn't occur at retirement, it's happening all the way through your life and through these life stages, which is why not only our work, I guess we're, as I mentioned this before, that work in not only schools, workplaces, the community partnerships that I've been responsible for, the online work that a couple of my colleagues here are responsible for driving. Vulnerability, I guess, is a risk at any stage in life, including for those who are reasonably well sorted in the middle of their lives and relationship breakdowns, other events, all the rest of it. Vulnerability for all of us is, I guess, somewhere not that far away always. The other thing to note about that is not only does vulnerability occur at every stage of life, but the other, I guess, piece in the year of the review is that addressing that vulnerability is about much more than retirement income policies. I think that was the other key learning from 2016. It's actually much what it takes to address vulnerability has little amount to do with retirement income policy settings. Now, I'll get to some of that, and I guess the scope of some of the partnerships that I've been involved in driving for the Commission are testament to that. This piece of work around segmentation, one of the things that was also going on in 2015 when I arrived were strategically, I guess, efforts to quantify and characterise where New Zealanders sit on the financial capability continuum as lead for the National Strategy for Financial Capability, figuring out where we and the others who contribute to this space play and contribute to improving outcomes across the board. And this segmentation model was born. I should probably qualify at this point that I was given a hard time about this, the health sector analogy in a community setting recently, for quite legitimate reasons in terms of how negative clumping New Zealanders into being in intensive care on the ward or sorted enough that the down to GP visits only can be. At the time this started, it was a really useful and important part of, I guess, that process of not only our characterising where people were, but as we engaged with people, the swimming analogy, sinking badly, sinking a bit, just treading water. These are things that at the time when we were doing this work, and this work now includes some 18,000 interviews across this period, it's how people describe their their situation, drowning in debt, whatever else it is. Now, there may be a language shift in this, but it's still helpful for us in figuring out where we apply our effort, where the issues are. And across this, I don't know how easily you can see it, but some 14% of New Zealanders in this ICU segment, 36% on the ward, and around half of New Zealanders down to GP visits, which means they're well sorted, and I guess the distribution of numbers. I guess the other thing to note about, while I'm talking about low-income populations, actually what we're finding is much of the real challenge for us, and the real risk for us all, is what's happening through the middle of this. A good chunk of New Zealanders who are earning too much to really be highly visible and needing some of that intervention, crisis management work that goes on at this end, and there's a lot of really great work going on, primarily driven by MSD in the ICU space, but a bunch of New Zealanders who aren't earning enough, not only say for retirement, but to get ahead. The missing middle, the working poor, I've heard a whole lot of labels for that group, but increasingly it's an issue for us. Home ownership, all of those things are a feature for that group. So again, out of the segmentation work, some of the barometer, it's not that I have no data. In fact, Celestina Galicki, who's our research analyst, gave me a spiral-bound tome full of data from the barometer from the last 3 years, but I've chosen to leave that up there because I'm not going to talk to the numbers. I did fish some key numbers out of that work that go to our barometer and segmentation work across those three segments, and these are the bits that go to, I guess, low incomes. Saving, those are enrolled in KiwiSaver. What that top line shows is that auto-enrollment's working. You know, there's fairly consistent numbers of proportion of New Zealanders enrolled across those three segments. Next one down, I guess much clearer about what the issues are though. The non-contribution rates at ICU and on the ward relative to GP visits. And those who really will never save money, again, there's not an unsurprising skew there in terms of where. Now, part of that's not about their for some at the sharpest end of this, it's not just about a willingness to save, or it's about income adequacy. It's having enough to save, let alone get ahead. And that bottom one, home ownership across those three segments. There are, and take the point that there's a whole lot of numbers around where home ownership's at, but a lot of data is fairly compelling. I've seen some Stats NZ data that's quite clear about where Maori and Pasifika home ownership rates are now relative to where they were 30 years ago. And they should be of great concern to all of us. Obviously, across these segments, there's an ethnic skew across this as well. Maori and Pacific, so highly represented at the lower ends of this. But those numbers, I guess, are an important part of informing our work. If you had a look at the big numbers, $1 trillion worth of property assets, 248 billion worth of housing debt. On the face of it, there isn't a debt ratio problem skew, but we know how that equity is skewed across these segments, and that does increasingly become a problem for all of us. And why the plight of low-income New Zealanders should matter to all of us. And I guess that's where some of these numbers do become fairly compelling. And this was part of the 2016 engagement process as well, getting New Zealanders engaged in this conversation. With New Zealand Super currently costing us $30 million a day. Ageing population means that cost doubles in 10 years, trebles in 20 years. I don't know whether those are forecasts or projections, but that's kind of what that looks like. It's that ageing population also sees dependency ratios change across that time. And I've pinched one of your slides because my numbers from Treasury didn't quite look the same. But I thought I'd take yours, and because they don't look dissimilar. But I guess that's an issue for all of us as well. Yeah, is what that ageing population means to us. But wait, there's more moment is around, and I saw another slide earlier about this young brown population, this ageing white population, is that with Maori and Pasifika birth rates tracking at 2.4 to 2.6 relative to Asian and Euro New Zealanders at 1.4, 1.9, which I don't think quite hits even that regeneration rate, renewal rate. If that young Maori and Pacific population remain anchored in low wage, low skill employment through that period, we are all going to hell in a handbasket. Yes. But again, those are not issues that are sorted by retirement income policies. They're important, but so the join up across these different work streams become a really critical part of how we address this. And I think that's strongly connected to the wellbeing cohort that this government is driving with the next budget. My last slide, there's one of our Aussie friends left here, and my friend David Boyle, who's a mad muser, I thought this was for him as well. It was a quote from a reasonably well known, I think, he's my vintage, poet, philosopher, Aussie, who turned politician, who I don't think he's a politician anymore, but Mr. Peter Garrett. You'll read about it. And I guess it was this was nothing other than, for me, the lyrics in this have always, I guess, resonated with me, but in this space, the rich get richer, the poor get the picture. The bombs never hit you when you're down so low. I'm not so sure about that one. The bosses need decisions, the workers need ambitions. There won't be no collisions when they move so slow. So I think the call to action is around the need for not just collaboration, but courage around some of what needs to happen in this space. And that was about me.